Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing the game between the Sharks and the Florida Panthers, in which the Sharks have lost 5-3, so they cap off the season series against the Panthers with a 0-2 score, having let in 5 goals in each of those games against this team. And this game started off, and the first period went pretty well for the Sharks, you could say. While the Panthers would get a decently early goal from Dadonov to make it 1-0, the Sharks would be able to tie it up with Gambrell, and it was a pretty solid 20 minutes for the Sharks. You could say that they were the better team, although it wasn't by much. Come second period, it would be the Panthers getting the only goal there. That would be Mike Hoffman off of a bad Brent Burns giveaway to make it 2-1 Panthers, and that would be the score going into the final 40 minutes. Now, we have to recall that the Sharks in the previous game only scored a single goal on a manned net against the Wild. That came also from Dylan Gambrell, actually. And with Erik Karlsson out of the lineup, Evander Kane out of the lineup, Logan Couture, Tomas Hertl out of the lineup, it was going to be hard-pressed for the Sharks to put up too much offense, but in the end, they would get a couple more goals, although it would be for naught, as they would find themselves chasing the game from this point on. Colton Sevier would make it 3-1 Panthers before LeBanc in the last few minutes of the game would make it 3-2 on a power play. But sadly, the Panthers would get a pretty killer goal from Anton Strawman to make it 4-2. Meyer would get it close once more in the last couple of minutes to make it 4-3, but the Sharks, as has sort of been the case for the majority of this season, are unable to get that 6-on-5 goal, and eventually Trocheck scores on the empty net in just the last few seconds to make it 5-3 Panthers. First thing to talk about would be Aaron Dell, as he surprisingly gets the start tonight, or this afternoon, I should say. And I haven't been super impressed with the choices that Bob Booner has made when talking about the goalie starting. I feel like he's gotten it right most of the time, but I was always surprised when he had given that game to Jones right out of the All-Star break, or almost right out of the All-Star break against Vancouver. It seemed like a game that Dell should have started, and now I'm extremely surprised why Dell ended up getting tonight's game. I realized that within the last month, Jones has sort of put himself in a backup role while Dell has played well enough to be in a starter role, but Jones just got a shutout. It's the team's first shutout of the year. He played pretty well in that game against the Wild. I see zero reason why he shouldn't be given another game, especially since it's not as though the Sharks are really just trying their absolute best, trying to take the exact perfect measures to try and make it back to the playoffs. No, maybe you should give that game to Martin Jones after he just maybe built up some confidence in that game against the Minnesota Wild. And Dell here tonight, he wasn't particularly good, although I guess he wasn't awful. He didn't have too much of a chance on the Dadonov one, didn't have much of a chance on the Hoffman. Well, you could say he could have made the save on the Hoffman one, but it was a nice move by Hoffman. The one that really is disappointing is this Sevier goal. Especially this was a tough one to let up to make it 3-1, as it was a pretty bad rebound from Aaron Dell, and also a tough one on the Strawman one. While this one was a great shot by Anton Strawman and it was a tough save to make, in the position the Sharks were in where they just got that goal to make it 3-2 and they cut the lead in half, you would have liked to see your goaltender make that save, and Dell in his past few starts has been able to do that, but he wasn't able to do it here. So 4 goals let in for Dell, and I believe it is confirmed that Jones will get the next start on Thursday, but still was just kind of surprised why he didn't just get it here tonight. I mean, it's not like it's the case where, you know, your starters carry Price, so even if your backup gets a shutout, you go back to Price, or I guess in the case of a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning, if your backup gets a shutout, you go back to Vasilevsky. Anyway, no, the Sharks have a pretty 1A, 1B, even though Dell has been the starter for the past month. 3 months ago, it would have been crazy to suggest that if Jones got a shutout, you wouldn't put him right back in, and so not sure what happened here. Next, I'll be talking about Brent Burns. I mentioned him in my previous game as having really stepped up in the absence of Erik Karlsson to really take back that role that he once had just a couple years ago of being the guy on the back end. And tonight, Brent Burns sort of had, you know, some Brent Burns giveth, Brent Burns taketh away moments, as he just seemed completely lost on this goal by Dadonov. He should have been covering him, but for some reason was just decided to be in the middle of the ice in the slot for absolutely no reason, and then he had that bad giveaway on the Hoffman one, but he makes a great play offensively to keep the puck in the zone that would eventually lead, or very, very closely lead, to the goal scored by Kevin Labanc. So a couple of really bad plays that lead to those first 2 goals by the Panthers, but also a pretty solid play that gets the Sharks back in it. So it's shaky, as has been mostly the Brent Burns game this season. Next, talking about Timo Meier. Now, the Sharks came into this season with 4 solidified top 6 players: Hertl, Couture, Kane, and Meier. They had one player in Kevin Labanc who was sort of borderline, and then they were looking for a 6th guy possibly in the system. Now, that certainly didn't pan out. Labanc hasn't really proven himself to be in the top 6, so it really just left the Sharks with 4 of those players. In tonight's game, however, with no Hertl, no Couture, and no Kane, it's really only Timo Meier who, if it were game 1 of the regular season on a perfectly healthy Sharks team, would actually find himself still in that top 6. And he had a very good game here this afternoon against the Panthers. He scored that late goal to make it 4-3, but just in general, he was making a lot of the great plays. You could really tell when Meier is on his game. I've mentioned this before, when he's really moving his feet, but he's not trying to do too much with the puck. He is doing things with it. He is holding it. He is protecting it, but he's not trying to do too much, and he's not taking just those weak shots on net. So a solid game from Meier. He will have to do some of similar things, at least for the next game against the New Jersey Devils on Thursday, since Kane will be still serving a suspension, though his last one. He will get a bit more support when Kane does return to the lineup the game after that. And finally, I'll talk about the 4th line. Now, judging by the lines that the Sharks have here, it's probably hard to determine what the exact 4th line is, because a couple of these lines could probably pass as that, but I'm talking about the Suomela, True, and Gambrell line. As I said, Gambrell 2 games in a row now with a goal. Alexander True has been a pretty pleasant surprise. He was someone who led the AHL for the Sharks, the Barracuda, in scoring last season, but he wasn't particularly impressive in the preseason or in the rookie camp, and so he did not make the team out of training camp, and I wasn't sure if he would even get a spot here, but with all the injuries, True does manage to make it up, and as I said, pretty impressive. Suomela also had a very good game as well. Unfortunately, he does get injured, and we'll see if he is out long-term, like has been the case with so many Sharks players so far, or if he could maybe return in just a few games like he did last time with his injury. And Gambrell as well, finally beginning to come into his own. Was always a player who seemed to be borderline for the San Jose Sharks. Could he make it on the 4th line? Could he make it on the 3rd line? At times he looks like a solid NHL player, but at times it looks like he should go back to the AHL. Right now he's in that NHL pace, and with all these injuries, there's no reason for him to actually be able to lose this lineup spot, so hopefully he takes the most advantage of it as possible. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday. They'll face off against the New Jersey Devils, one of the few teams who are below them in the standings, and with the New Jersey Devils recently having traded their captain as well as one of their better forwards in Blake Coleman, the Devils are depleted, so we'll see if the Sharks can take advantage of that by getting a victory there. Class dismissed.